So I'm very pleased that we can have our author Ruth Bass with us here today. She has written several books. We have a couple of them available from the library. We have a couple that she brought in as well. We are very excited to have you, and enjoy.
And I just want to thank you for all coming when it was thunder and lightning and everything else. It seemed like the sky was falling. Almost every time can you all hear me? Almost every time I talk about my books, someone in the audience says, "How long did it take you to write that?" And I used to say what year I started and what year I finished, but then I shifted to, well, maybe about 2 years. Lately, I've been thinking more about that question. Does it mean when the idea first popped into my head? Or when I finally gave in and started to type? There was a book I didn't want to write that I couldn't get rid of, so I wrote it. Or the distance between those things and the time that it gets edited, fixed, which means repaired, and appeared between covers. The factual answer for this book, The Triangle, is over a period of time between the beginning of the pandemic and when I finally had books this past April. But because of the isolation of the pandemic, I had very little to do except walk the dog. There was actually another book in between. The whole truth about that question, how long did it take you, is it took a lifetime. Because it's a lifetime of experiences that make any writer look at the world in a certain way, and it comes out in every story. So that business printed in the front of almost every fiction book you write about how this bears no resemblance to anything you've ever heard of or anybody you have ever heard of, living or dead, is true, but not entirely true. Here's an example. In my book, Sarah's Daughter, which was my first novel, set in the last quarter of the 19th century, one of my favorite passages goes like this. This teacher at the one-room school is coming for Sunday dinner, so it's a very big deal. And Sarah's mother died before this book started, so she's in charge of everything. And Rose, actually, mother was Sarah. She's very nervous about the whole thing. And her friend Alice says, "You could make the pie on Saturday too, as long as you tell Charles not to touch it." Charles is the 12-year-old, very mischievous brother. "Abby's worse," Rose said. "She doesn't like pie, but she loves the crust. One day we came down in the morning and all the crust was broken off the top of a strawberry rhubarb pie that hadn't even been cut yet. At first, Mother thought it was a mouse, but then she noticed that Abby had her face almost in her plate. "What did your mother do?" Em asked, thinking things would go very badly for her at home if she spoiled a pie that way. "She asked Abby if she thought the mouse had a name," Rose said. And Abby started to cry and say she was sorry she hadn't meant to eat all the way around the pie, just take a little piece that had cracked, but it was so good she couldn't stop. And then Mother said she would have to make a crust when she came home from school to replace the ruined one. So that was the day Abby learned how to cut the lard into the flour and roll out the pie crust without it sticking and pinch the edges into a neat row. Mother made her do it over and over until it was pretty good for a 7-year-old. By that time, the crust was as gray as the cat and had to be thrown away. Come to think of it, Abby can help with the pie, even though she can't do the custard part. "I can't believe your mother didn't just give her a good spanking," Emily said. "I think that's what would have happened to me." "Well," Rose said, "sometimes she spanked us, but Abby was certainly punished. By the time she made a crust that was acceptable, she was probably wishing she'd had a spanking instead." "I can't believe your mother asked if the mouse had a name," Alice said, thinking how sad it was that Rose had put her mother in the past tense. They had just learned about tenses in school, but she and Emily didn't have to put their mothers in the past tense. She hurried on, hoping to take Rose's mind off her mother's death. "I mean, my mother would have started talking in that tone that makes you want to be in the front room or upstairs. And then she would have asked, who ate the crust? And if no one answered, she would have gotten very angry, not asked about a mouse's name. But it worked, Rose said. So, where did that come from? My daughter Amy, now head of the sports studies department at Manhattanville College, damaged quite a few pies at our house when she was growing up. And that annoyance popped out of my brain when I wrote a chapter about the teacher coming for Sunday dinner and a pie being needed. And I thought, oh, there's Amy and there's Abby. More recently, in The Triangle, which is a story about murder, a trial, a conviction, and all the things that go with it, a friend of mine said that it was a really fun book to read. And I said, murder, trial, convictions, prison. But anyway, the young woman reporter is threatened. She's been interviewing somebody during the trial, and he was thinking that he liked this interview thing a lot more than being a witness. She wasn't bad to look at, nice pins. But she also was seeing Gino. Had to. He was paying for her apartment. Mary had no idea how she'd confirmed that, but she did know Sylvia had moved quite suddenly after she accused Genovese of rape. Was it fear or loss of rent or both? She thanked the man that she was interviewing and started to walk away when a tall, thin-faced man wearing a Yankees hat shouted, "Hey," and strode up to them. "You knock off writing about my kid, or you'll be one sorry young lady," he snarled. Her friend put a hand on Mary's arm and pulled her toward him, hoping this wasn't going to go beyond words. But the man snorted and walked off. "Who?" Mary asked a little shakily. "Charlie's dad. Not a nice person. Seems to be day to day, but not. Meaning he beat up on Charlie every day until the kid was 15 and bigger than him." "How do you know that?" He grinned at her. "Ask around. I know what goes on in this town." And then added, "Better pay attention to where you are. He's quite unnice. Ask the cops." And he sauntered off, leaving Mary quite intrigued with her new acquaintance as she hurried back to the courtroom. Well, that happened to me. And it was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I was the police and court reporter for the Berkshire Eagle for 5 years in the late 50s and early 60s. And the father of a young defendant at 5 o'clock in the afternoon phoned me at the paper, and the newsroom was pretty empty, so it was the wrong atmosphere, and said, "If you write one more word about my son, you will be sorry." Well, I loved the police, fire, and court beat, and I worried for days about the threat and the looks that man gave me whenever he was in the courtroom. I knew that he was a fairly scary guy. But I didn't tell my editor because I was a female reporter in a room full of men, and I was afraid my editor would take me off the story to protect me. That's one of the worst things that can happen to a reporter. I don't think I told anyone except my husband. So in a small way, I'm actually in this book, more than being all in for this book. Little bits like this are spattered through all my books, and because working on a computer for many years, I've come to think of writers' minds filled with little folders, stories, paragraphs, single words. In the midst of a new book, one or several of those folders just pops open, and something that the writer hasn't thought about in years is standing tall, demanding to talk. My husband he wrote detective books and other kinds of novels too, but one of his detective books was almost done, and we were all relieved because we figured then we were going to get him back at the dinner table instead of half of his brain being somewhere else. And he came up from the cellar office one night and said, well, it's going to be more than 2 weeks. And we all moaned and said, why? And he said, because someone I wasn't expecting showed up. And it was true that a character had just walked out of his head onto the paper, and he had to deal with him. So that was going to take longer. I constantly marvel about what my brain knows that I don't know that it knows. I had a lot of trouble with the ending of an earlier book, and I woke up one morning and the whole ending was in my head, a complete paragraph. I mean, all the words were there. The brain was busy writing my book while I was asleep. On a totally different front, I've become fairly attached to jigsaw puzzles. Are any of you obsessed with those 1,000 pieces on the dining room table? Okay. Well, I have a question for you. Have you gotten up in the morning and walked past the puzzle and picked up the piece that you were absolutely crazed about the day before and put it where it belongs? Well, I think that's very weird, but it happens. Fortunately, the brain's not selfish about what it knows. So we can translate stuff from one century to a different century, a different color, a different time, and make them come out of the mouth of someone they don't even know. And learn again that things change, but they also, in a way, all stay the same. The anecdotes and experiences of one century, as I learned very quickly when I was writing Sarah's Daughter, can work in a different one. I wrote 4 novels about the fictional Hibbard family on a New England farm in the 1800s. Those were inspired by the story of my grandmother losing her mother at 14 or 15 and being expected to step up, which meant laundry, firewood, taking care of her young siblings, taking care of her strict, grieving father who was drinking a lot of hard cider and becoming more and more difficult to deal with. That was all true, and it was enough to set me off on a story. And so after that, I fictionalized my grandmother, which really was a lot of fun. And I think she would probably approve of that. She had never talked, all the time that we spent together, she never talked about that time in her life. She just talked about good things. The triangle comes out of my coverage of the police and the court. For a 20-something female, it was an introduction to a whole population that had never crossed my path before. It was an education. It was not just seeing people I'd never noticed before. It was seeing people and ways of life that I didn't know existed. And for 2 of my best friends, it was also an embarrassment. We would be walking down North Street, and some guy slumped in a doorway would say, "Hello, Ruth." And I would answer him, and they'd say after we walked in, "How do you know him?" And the answer was, "Well, I wrote about him." Then they always wanted to know more. This book was inspired by 2 real guys in their 70s who had a relationship with the same 35-year-old woman. It was a long time ago, but how could I forget about that? It seemed impossible to me at the time. In real life, one found out that he was being 2-timed and became angry. In fiction, all kinds of different things happened, so the book does not follow necessarily the original story, although the part about the 2 elderly men and the woman half their age was true. So he's very angry because he's beginning to suspect that his Sylvia is not faithful to him. So he goes to sit on a bench. Still had it, he told himself, with the ladies, didn't he? Even ones half his age. He had no problem with Sylvia. Not a young thing, but still a looker. Sylvia, damn her to hell. What if she was getting it on with Graysock and just pretending with him to get her rent paid? The anger boiled up again, and a string of Italian words spilled out of his mouth, fast as bullets from an automatic rifle. "Hey, old man, you can't talk like that on the street," came a woman's voice. "Can," Gino said, looking up angrily. Seeing his face, the woman backed away and scurried off. He noticed a teenager leaning against a pole on the other side of the street. Kid was laughing. "You laughing at me?" Gino growled. "Maybe," the kid said, his wide grin revealing teeth as perfect as James Dean's. "You want to make something of it?" Gino took in the dirty jeans, the unwashed hair, and the sulky look, and then he laughed too. "Come sit with an old man for a bit," he said, rather taken with a kid who was that sassy. "Why?" "Might have a little work for you," Gino said, not really having any plan for the boy at all. The boy crossed the street and sat down, and Gino realized he was a little older than he'd thought. Not a boy. He didn't smell very good, but he didn't smell very bad either. "You homeless?" Gino asked. "Nope." "Employed?" "Nope." "I'm Gino. Glad to meet you." "I think I'm glad to meet you." "Well, I'm Charlie, and you can be glad as you want, long as it's not sex. Not right here on the street." Intrigued, Gino asked, "What if it's not on the street?" "Depends on the money," Charlie said. Gino was beginning to wonder how he ever got into this conversation. Sylvia. It was Sylvia. He was going to kill her. But maybe he should get someone else to take care of that. He looked at the young man, guessed he might be about 20, 21. "Getting enough on my own," Gino said. "So what else do you do for money?" "Most anything," Charlie said. "Beat up a guy last week for a few bucks." Why? Gino had never met a person like this. "Wife caught him with her best friend. Wanted him punished." "Seems like better to beat up the friend." "I don't hit women," Charlie said, standing up quickly and walking away. The actual woman who was naive enough to think she could keep her life a secret in a small city died before the trial of one of her lovers. So Sylvia in my book is totally fictional. I never saw that 35-year-old. Don't know what she looked like, just know she caused a bit of a problem. So getting to know Sylvia was a lot of fun, and writing about her was really something I really enjoyed. If you read the book, you may not like her totally, but I hope you will. I'm going to read you a little bit about Sylvia. So this is the very beginning of the book, chapter 1. Sylvia looked at herself in the full-length mirror she'd been lucky enough to find at Goodwill. She was a little slimmer, she could tell. The black knit top didn't cling to her hips anymore, and she didn't have that bra spillover under her arms. She put her fists under the top and pushed the fabric out, trying to stretch it a little bit more. The flared skirt and boots were good, she thought. Stanley would approve. "Ladylike," he would say with a chuckle. The real joke, she knew, was that he wanted her to look like a lady, but not behave like one. He enjoyed her raucous laugh, her way with a not-so-clean joke, and her willingness to go to bed with him, even at his advanced age. Nearly double hers, but she liked being with him anyway. He was nice to her, and he was in great shape for a man of his years, tall and lean and strong. She didn't suppose anyone would call him good-looking, but he was okay to look at, especially if he was wearing long sleeves. She had to admit the crepey look on the inside of his arms was a little creepy. "Crepey, creepy," she laughed, and then shivered, thinking about her other man friend. He was crude, bragged a lot about things he supposedly did in the past. He was demanding, impatient, and fat. She didn't like the fat. When he grabbed her in a hug, his stomach got in the way, and she ended up leaning forward, her feet far from his. Her kind of best hug was feeling sort of glued to the man, head to foot. His made her feel off balance and awkward, but she wouldn't tell him that. She only told him things he wanted to hear. She turned away from the mirror, switched off her bedroom light, and went to the kitchen of her small apartment. At least tonight she'd be meeting Stanley without fear. Gino was out of town this week, visiting his divorced daughter in New Jersey. She put on her car coat, smiled at how the buttons no longer pulled, and went out, locking the door behind her. She loved her small apartment. The rent was low, the place was clean, no cockroaches, no mice, and she could walk to the grocery store. It was one of the nicer things Gino had done for her. He found the place, paid the first 6 months' rent with cash, and handed her a small roll of bills to get herself a sofa, a TV, and a bed. "That's all we'll be needing," he said with a rare smile. "He bought me right then and there," she said to herself. Damned if a wad of cash, sorry, damned if a wad of cash doesn't wipe out fear. But a shudder traveled through her shoulders. She knew the money wasn't given out of the goodness of Gino's heart. She was pretty certain he didn't have one. A pulse, certainly, but not a heart. "Shit," she muttered to herself. "I've gotten myself into a mess." It's interesting to me that friendship between women walked into my novels and had an impact. I probably don't really need that. Thank you. And now I don't have to bend over and pick it up. It was true in the Sarah series. One of the things that was really important in that first book especially was the very close friendship she had with these two girls who had a far more normal life than she did. And one of the reasons that book happened at all was I was a Girl Scout leader at that time, and I was dealing with kids about the age of Rose, who was 14 or 15, my grandmother, sort of. And I kept thinking about all the things that my grandmother had to do and how many of them that these girls would be totally unable to do, would have not know where to begin. And that Rose and my grandmother, the father wanted her to quit school and just take care of him and the family, but she would not do that. So my grandmother actually finished high school and did all the rest of that stuff at the same time. In the triangle, it's Sylvia and Patsy. Patsy is one of those priceless friends that you cherish one day and want to abandon the next because she's down to earth, tells it like it is, and has no hesitation about squelching Sylvia's impulses. So when she finds out that one of Sylvia's boyfriends is on the warpath, she proposes that they get out of town for a bit. And so they have this "You could leave town," Patsy said. "That might be the best thing. I'm not going to pick at you and remind you that I told you long ago that Gino wasn't a free lunch. He's bad, Sylvia. And aside from moving to Australia, what would the plan be?" Sylvia said, choking a little, then taking a long drink. "Break up with them, one of them for starters," Patsy said. "Which one?" "Stanley. He sounds like a gentleman or something like one. And if you break up with Gino, I wouldn't put it past him to kill you." "I wouldn't either," Sylvia muttered. "He gets so angry over nothing." "And this isn't nothing," Patsy added, suggesting that she go with Sylvia for this escape weekend. "Would you? Could I?" "We'll take the bus tonight," Patsy said. "Can I tell Stanley?" Sylvia wanted to know. "Jesus, Mary and Joseph, have you heard nothing I've been saying? The answer is no, no, and no, and no." She paused and broke into a grin. "Oops, you've gone and fallen for the gent, haven't you? Not supposed to do anything dumb like that. Just love 'em and leave 'em and get what you can." So a little later on, Sylvia says, "Where are we going?" in a voice that seemed very small. "Worcester." "Why not Boston? It's so much fun there." "Because, dummy, we're hiding and nobody goes to Worcester." I can't read you any more passages because you already know that somebody is going to get killed, someone is going to get arrested, someone is going to be found guilty or not, or go to prison or not. And there are clues along the way because it's really annoying when you read a book and the writer suddenly inserts a creature that seems to come from Mars who turns out to be the killer. So you're supposed to know that somebody in the book is the guilty one. No characters should jump out from stage right on the last page. When writing up court stories, I had my own ideas about whether the defendant was guilty or not, but I always tried to report it fairly so that the readers would come to the same conclusion that I did, and possibly, unless the jury was somehow rigged, I think that mostly happens on TV, that they would agree with the jury. One more thing about writing. This is totally not about these books. As some of you, I hope, already know, I write a weekly column for the Eagle. Because of technology, I do it at home. I ship it into them. I don't see the editors or really even know them under the new crew. In January, I wrote a New Year's column about making a resolution. It's something I've always scoffed at, because I think they last until maybe the 15th of January or the 1st of February. Although I have written some columns making resolutions for other people. Because of a jigsaw puzzle that I got for Christmas, composed, and I didn't bring that diagram with me, but it's composed of 2 stacks of books like this, inside of a black border. 66 books that have been banned by somebody, somewhere, sometime. I took a close look. It was a wonderful puzzle to do because it was pretty simple. They were just stacked there and all the words went together. I had read only 7 of the 66. My 16-year-old granddaughter, who was helping with the puzzle, had read 13. My resolution was to read banned books this year, and I've been doing just that. Just want to tell you that none of the books has damaged me, but I've learned a lot. What I haven't learned, however, is why they were banned. I mean, I can figure out why a 6-year-old shouldn't read this book, but I don't understand why a 17-year-old can't read it. So you don't give The Handmaid's Tale to a 10-year-old, but there's no reason why my teenage granddaughter, who reads everything, couldn't read it. Among the new books, the books that were new to me this year were, and I should have read a couple of them a long time ago, The Color Purple, Fahrenheit 451, Beyond Magenta, The Glass Castle, which is a memoir, and Lord of the Flies. I just finished Lord of the Flies, which my older 2 had to read in school, and I understand now why they hated it. There's a lot of scenic description in between the activities of the boys on their deserted island, and some of the activities disintegrate into very evil things. But I don't know if they absorbed the message of that book, but I'm sure they hated the pages about thickets and sky colors and sunrises and sunsets and the darkness of the forest. It was a lot. I didn't love all of that extra stuff either. Many of the banned books in the puzzle were classified as young adult, and Sarah's daughter was YA, and then it was read by people from, 12 to 90, because the young adult category is targeted by many of the people who don't wish people to have the freedom to read. The book from the puzzle that had the most impact on me, and I'm not done yet with the list, is one that everyone in the country should read. Highly enjoyable and high impact. It's called The Hate You Give, and the U is just a U instead of a Y-O-U, by a woman named Angie Thomas. I'm thinking of giving it to all but the 17-year-old in our immediate family for Christmas, because I really want them to read it. She's already read it. And that's my story. And I'm happy to answer questions, except not how long it took me to write this book.
You went to work for the Berkshire Eagle at a time when women were not hired in the job that you got.
Right.
What do you think it was about you that convinced them?
Well, I had a very good master's degree from Columbia Journalism School, which would be the first thing. I wasn't just walking in off the street. And I had gotten a couple of prizes that were pretty nice too. And it turned out that the editor, who was Pete Miller at the time, wanted to have me be his assistant. That's what he had in mind. But his assistant was not getting married until August. So she was like a clerk, and I'm horrified when I hear that might be where I'm going to go. So I started writing all the stories that the city editor assigned me, and then he one day said, "Go with John to the court and the police station and see what it's like." And I said, "Okay." So I went off and I wrote some of the stories, and the other reporter wrote some of them. And the next day, the city editor said to me, "Do that again." And I said, "Where's John?" And he said, "He's on a day off. You just do it." So, sink or swim.
Can I ask what year that was?
I went there in 1956.
I have another question.
Yes.
When you write a mystery, I read a lot of mysteries, you work from the front to the back or the back to the front? Do you know how it's going to end and then fill in and introduce characters?
Did everybody hear that question? He wants to know if I work from the front to the back or if I know how it's going to come out and I go to the front. I have no idea how any of my books is going to come out.
Oh, okay.
Front to back.
Front to back.
I don't read last pages in books either.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Quite some time ago, someone said that when a fiction writer puts down a story about something that happened, let's just say in government, and in the front of the book it's a disclaimer that this is a work of fiction, does that grant you immunity even if you're telling the truth?
I think you could have trouble.
Could you
Yeah.
get in trouble?
Yeah. And especially now.
Not using the right names or anything else, but can you believe that those things actually happen behind the scenes, let's just call it in government?
Well, most of the time nothing happens because maybe people don't believe that disclaimer in the front of the book, but they like the story and they're not going to do anything. If it was somebody that thought it was their family, then with this litigious world we live in, it might be a problem.
You haven't heard of it, you're coming back to haunt an author.
No. And I do know a person who wrote a World War II book in which obviously he was on the inside of a whole pile of things and he turned it into fiction.
Yeah, that's what I
And
meant.
he never got into trouble. Anybody else? Well, thank you, and thank you all for coming. And books are available if you're interested. I've not been in the Lee Library before, and I think that children's area out there is just stunning. It's big and it's pretty.
Carnegie Building.